We know that there are many prophecies about Jesus. There are a ton. And if you ask anyone that goes to church and you say, hey, did Jesus fulfill all the prophecies about him? And everyone's going to say, absolutely. When Jesus said, it is finished, it is done, it means that everything was fulfilled. If you take a look at Matthew chapter 5, verse 17, great verse. What does it say? Jesus himself says, do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them, right? Now, one thing you have to understand is law, prophets. Law, prophets is basically the entire Old Testament. Law refers to the first 5 books of the Old Testament, and then the prophets refers to the remaining books. So when Jesus says law and prophets, it means the entire Old Testament. Remember, at the time of Jesus, the New Testament did not exist. It wasn't even written. Only the Old Testament was there. So Jesus is like, I didn't come to abolish it. I came to fulfill everything, right? Everything. And we're all going to say, amen, Jesus. Jesus, amen. You came to fulfill everything. And we're like, yeah, okay. He came to fulfill everything. Now, is it true? Is it really, really true? Now, this is something I want to bring up to you guys is this. A lot of times, as people who believe in Jesus, we will say, I believe in Jesus. But then when you say, I believe in Jesus, it also means he had to have fulfilled all the prophecies that were about him. Okay? So I want to bring up some things where you can look at and say, wait a second. Did he actually fulfill this or not? Did he fulfill it or not? All right. So first one I'm going to take a look at is Isaiah 66. Now remember, Isaiah is in the Old Testament. It is part of the prophets. And in verse 15 and 16, it says, this is how the Lord is going to come. This is how Jesus comes. It says, see, the Lord is coming with fire, and his chariots are like a whirlwind. He will bring down his anger with fury and his rebukes with flames of fire. For with fire and with his sword, the Lord will execute judgment on all people. Okay. So, Jesus in Matthew 5:17 said, I'm here to fulfill everything, which includes Isaiah, right? The law and the prophets. And what does Isaiah say? When Jesus comes, guess what's going to happen? Number one is he's going to have a sword, probably a really, really big one. And then also he's probably going to breathe fire from his mouth and kill tons of people, right? So here we have judgment being executed by sword and by fire. And we're like, oh, when Jesus comes, it's going to be so amazing. But when you look in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the Gospels, it talks about Jesus' life. Did you ever see Jesus talk to someone like, hey, what are you doing? Judgment. And then he takes fire and goes, ah, and the person's screaming, ah, and he's all on fire. And Jesus is like, yeah, executed judgment. Do you see that? Do you see? Actually, even when it comes to the sword, right? When it comes to the sword, what happened when Peter was defending Jesus? He's like, I will defend you, Jesus. And what does Jesus say? Hey, Peter, put the sword back. And Peter could say, but you're supposed to come with a sword. So what? Why can't I? No sword. He's like, put it back in. Jesus even tells Peter to put his sword away. So did Jesus fulfill the fire and the sword? It's an interesting one, because in order for him to be the Messiah, he has to fulfill it. There's no other way. I'll give you another one, another interesting one. And these are like the big prophecies in the Old Testament time. Look at Daniel chapter 7, verse 13. Daniel 7:13. It says, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. So this is where we kind of get that concept of the rapture, where we're expecting Jesus to come on the clouds, and then all of a sudden we're like, oh, and then all of a sudden we fly into the sky, meet Jesus in the clouds. That's what's supposed to happen. But this is actually something from the Old Testament time. And in the Old Testament, they say, oh, yeah, Jesus is going to come on the clouds. So if Jesus, like we already read, he is supposed to fulfill everything in the Old Testament, that includes Daniel. Anything that, I'm not talking about every prophecy that's in the Old Testament. We're talking about the prophecies referring to Jesus. The coming of the Messiah, the coming of God. So some people might say, oh, what about this one? We're talking strictly about the ones talking about Jesus, right? And there are specific ones talking about the Messiah. And there's another one. He will come from the sky, from the heavens on the clouds. Very interesting. Because I think from our knowledge, right, from what we know, did Jesus come from the clouds, or was he born in a manger in Bethlehem through his mother Mary? Right? So here he is supposed to come in the clouds, but yet he's born in a manger from a woman. And even the Magi came to come before him. The shepherds came and saw him too. So I was like, well, he's supposed to come on the clouds, but how come he didn't come on the clouds? Last one, I would say Joel chapter 3. Verse 15, but I would say 14 and 15. The 14 at the end of it tells you that for the day of the Lord is near in the valley of decision. And verse 15 says, the sun and moon will be darkened and the stars will no longer shine. Did that happen when Jesus came? Like, remember, the sun kind of darkened when he died on the cross, but then it's still there. Could have been an eclipse, right? So that was darkened, but then it says the moon will no longer shine either. And also, the stars will no longer shine. But yet, it all still remained the same. So, if on the day of the Lord is supposed to be like this, then if we truly believe that Jesus is the Messiah, we have to believe that these actually happen. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Because when I do talk to people, and I talk to them, I remember I've been to 20 plus countries. 20 plus countries, going around meeting people, I always ask them about these things. And you know what they all say to me? It's not talking about the first coming, it's talking about the second coming. That's what they say to me. It's like, oh yeah, it didn't happen because it's not talking about his first, it's the second coming. They push it to the second coming, okay? Now let me tell you why this doesn't sound right. This is so weird for me. This is so weird. Like, think about this. Imagine you're living at the time of Jesus. Jesus is the Messiah. He says, I am the Messiah. And then you, as a true believer, said, you know what? If he's Messiah, I want to believe in him. So you come to Jesus and you're like, hey, Jesus, you're the Messiah, right? He's like, yes, I am. All right. So if you're truly the Messiah, the Old Testament says you're supposed to come with fire and a sword and like on the clouds and stuff like that. Did you come on the clouds? Where's the fire and the sword? And Jesus says, oh. That's not me. That's for later. That's for the second coming. Would you sit there and say, okay, I can die for this person. I can die for this cause? Can you imagine someone says, I couldn't fulfill it. Oh, it's for the next one. Do you think anyone would really believe in Jesus if we just said to him like, oh, those prophecies of the Old Testament that are there to prove that Jesus is Christ? If someone says to you, oh, he's Messiah, where's the sword? Oh, it's not going to happen this time. He said it's for the next time. Would you be skeptical? Would you be like, no, I can't believe you. If you don't fulfill it, how can I believe you? It makes no sense to push everything to the second coming because you can't figure out how it actually is. You know what I mean? Most people are going to push the prophecy to the second coming because they don't know how it was fulfilled. But what I'll tell you right now is, starting from next week, we're going to go into some of these prophecies of the Old Testament, how they were fulfilled in the New Testament. Starting from next week, I think next week we're going to do John the Baptist, right? And how he fulfilled the prophecies from the Old Testament time. We're going to take a look at these things because if you can't figure this out, we're stuck. You can't really say Jesus is the Messiah and then say that he didn't fulfill all the prophecies in the Old Testament time. And that's why I think it's going to be really fun as we kind of move forward talking about some of these things, some of these prophecies and how they came true and stuff.